Hello Internet! It's time for another Wednesday's serial, and this time I want to dive into something more bat-centric. So I tend to be more critical, and I rarely find events as engaging as I used to anymore. But that's usually because of the way they're handled. There's kind of this model of having your base event across 8-ish issues, the better part of a year, and tie-ins pulling in a whole bunch of different books. Now, I think it's more appeasable if, like, say, when it's Flashpoint and all of them are the Flashpoint minis with whatever character in the books can continue, though that didn't quite work out that way, but you get the idea, versus pulling in the general titles. So, like, with Marvel, with Axis, starting off series like Hobgoblin and then pulling in things like, I don't know, Thor or whatever it is, just derailing the books from people who are enjoying those main stories. And then books like over at DC, like Batgirl, suffer immensely and sometimes never recover from those derailments. And so that's why I'm finding the way this whole Robin Rises thing is happening with Batman Robin really intriguing. Part of the reason I find it so intriguing is because of the way that these two books are being handled. Batman Endgame is continuing and just playing with, oh look, it's a big Batman story, so we pretty much have to use Jokers the way it feels. Tying off of the last Joker story, but just it feels kind of haphazard, but it also has ruined this book in a certain light with derailing certain events or like foreshadowing so much that there's not as much suspense as to what's going to happen in this story. And so we're kind of left with this broken bit because of the publishing schedule and the way that these events are being told and doled out, and it gets really annoying when Batman Eternal goes on a slight derailment because this thing is an ending for another great many issues, which means another great many weeks. And meanwhile, this book slowly trudges on, and in every issue since Endgame started, there's a little piece of Batman Eternal kind of torn away. Batman Robin, on the other hand, has like nothing to do with what's going on in the rest of the Bat universe, but it's playing off of a lot of Bat lore. Now, at a certain point, you have to be familiar with at least more of the ending of Grant Morrison's run with Batman, which this book has always been very informed by. But that's also long enough ago that we're not ruining books coming out or anything. There's a lot going on, obviously, with Darkseid and Batman in here, and there's obviously things happening with Damian, and we all knew it was coming, but because we all know it's coming, they know they have to write a story that's going to satisfy that coming up. And when they do, it's really engaging. So not only is this book probably the biggest event happening Batman-wise, which comic world-wise is big news, we're also dealing with a fairly wrought subject of like death and rebirth in comics, which normally is an eye roll. But in this case, we're getting a lot of emotional engagement, and the way they're bringing it through still has some surprises to be held and is enjoyable to read. And what's great about that is it's not just like for the month being like, oh man, this happened, but when you go back to enjoy the story, there's actually something there. There's something of substance with the way it's handled. And that's the part I can't get into without making this super spoilery right now. So that's the other cool part, is we're going to have a reason to return. But Batman and Robin's event is just a really exciting, really engaging, and really big things happening in a book. And admittedly, yes, there are extra issues they're throwing in. So there was like the, Robin Rises little one-shot thing. They're having another one soon with them, Adam Kubert doing art and whatever. But I mean, yeah, it's a book and they're slotting in a few extra issues, but that is so much more appealing and so much more digestible as a book. And you know when they collect in a trade, it's just going to go along the lines. Whether you get the issues of the trade, it's not like this weird mishmash. It's not like when you go back years later. Because I've done this when you go back years later to read some of these big events. I have to look up online, like, what's a general reading order here? And even then, it doesn't really parse out because there's so many things happening, but you don't want to, like, piece through books that way necessarily. It's really haphazard, and it always runs into problems. No publisher has ever managed to pull this off, and many have tried. And I think handling it and just making sure that there's a really good story is totally the way to do it. So it's refreshing to see that something that a lot of us have been asking for a long time has finally been pulled off, and by all rights, it seems to be succeeding pretty darn well. Now, I don't think Batman Robin is outselling Batman the book, but I know it's up there. And, you know, if you're more on your Bat books and only want the big explosive stuff and the things that are really fun, this Batman Robin run has been the Bat book to turn to. And people have been saying that for a long time, but I think now it's really clear now that Tomasi's been given the full reign from DC to do, you know, the big deal, where Snyder's been getting that pretty much since day one, acting like every one of his is like one of those. I think it holds more weight when it actually is, and then when we come back down, we're going to have the stories that build to bigger things. There's an ebb and flow to quality storytelling, and that's what we're seeing with an ebb and flow with the Death and Rebirth and the fallout that comes from within. Plus, Batman on Apocalypse doing some big things. It's just fun DC comic goodness. So there you go. I thought that was the biggest book this week, at least in my pile, but, you know, let me know what you're reading. Always curious to hear, and hope you guys have a good week, and I'll catch you soon with another comic review.